When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
All right, hello YouTube. Welcome back to the Grease Goblin YouTube channel. And today's video, we're going to be continuing our Song of Ice and Fire reread. And get a snack. This is going to be a long video. This is going to be probably the longest reread video. Maybe one of the Ned chapters that I end up splitting into two. If you want to combine that, it's going to be longer. But this chapter is like 18, 19 pages, I believe. It took me quite a bit of time to do. And this is one of those chapters where I'm going to kind of talk about it, where it kind of feels like a chapter that could have been broken up into two. But George wanted to get to kind of the end of the chapter to establish some things. So this is a very long chapter. This is by far in my notes, this is 16 pages worth of notes for Catelyn VI. And so let's kind of give a little brief, I guess, overview of what this chapter is going to cover, and then we'll kind of dive into it. So this is going to pick up almost directly after the last Tyrion chapter. It's been about, I think, a day after that, because we kind of pick up with Tyrion and Catelyn. They've been on this journey, they're tired, but they finally make it to the Bloody Gate. They have a group of people that are with them at this point. There's a Sir Waynwood at this point that's with them. And so we see this entire journey of Catelyn getting from the Bloody Gate all the way up to the Eyrie, and then having a conversation with Lysa, all in one chapter. There's a lot of things we're introduced to this chapter. Notably, the Blackfish is a big one. We get Lysa's introduction. We get Robin Arryn's introduction. Maya Stone's introduction. We get an introduction into the Eyrie and the Vale as a whole, kind of its geography and kind of how it's defended and things like that. So much in this chapter to go over. And so, again, this is going to be a long one, and this is a long intro, but let's get into it. We'll be starting on page 359. So starting on page 359, the chapter begins with Donnell Waynwood telling Catelyn that she should have sent word they were coming and that they would have sent an escort to meet them. He notes the high pass is not safe for small parties, which is just like, when I was reading this, I was like, dude, really? Like, you think Catelyn doesn't know this? Like, they've lost half their party because of this. And yeah, it would have been nice to have sent a message, but obviously you can see Tyrion's like behind them. And Donnell Waynwood just like, he gives me the vibes that like he's a little slow. Like, he just doesn't pick up on cues. I don't know. But Catelyn again kind of reaffirms this, saying they figured this out as they lost 6 brave men, which is interesting because once again, we get some foreshadowing here with Stoneheart, the Catelyn side, of the Stoneheart side of Catelyn, where she thinks like she could not find it even in her heart to weep for them. Her heart felt like stone, and she was even starting to forget their names. And it really shows to me how the common soldier or average common person is kind of treated in this world. Here are these people, now maybe they did it for gold, maybe they kind of came along because they had to. Some of them were Lannister serving men to Tyrion, whether it was for loyalty, honor, things like that, chivalry. Catelyn is starting to forget their names, and she didn't really mourn them. She doesn't really know a lot of them that well. So again, you can't really ask her to maybe do that. And one of the things, right, that Ned teaches Robb is that, like, you can't really get close to your men because they may die on the battlefield. And so you may have to order them and to go to their deaths, basically. And so to me, it's interesting the way we see how the High Lords and High Ladies view it. And I really feel like how the common person is kind of a pawn for the High Lords and Ladies. Catelyn then notes that the clansmen attacked them day and night. And on the first day, they lost 3 men. So that was during the Tyrion chapter, and 2 more by night. And eventually Tyrion's other serving man, he had been the one that survived the first attack. He was kind of the one that wasn't really like a fighter. He was more of a servant, the one preparing fires and setting up Tyrion's tent or things of that nature. And he ends up dying to a fever and dying from his wounds. When they heard Donnell's approach, they assumed it was the worst, that the clansmen were back, and they prepared kind of a final stand. But Catelyn specifically notes that Tyrion and Bronn had been growing closer, as the two before on this final stand kind of were jesting and kind of talking and whispering to each other. But to their relief, it was not the clansmen. It was actually the Arryn Sigil of the Falcon, and it was Waynwood and his men. Donnell notes that the clansmen have grown more bold since Jon's death. And again, I want to point this out, that it shows a bit of cleverness from the clansmen, that they aren't these people that are just barbarians. They understand, okay, there's a child in charge. We can get away with a lot more now that Jon Arryn is dead. So I think that shows a bit of their cleverness and how they do think about how they're trying to go about things, which is something that Tyrion's going to play into further along in this book. But that gets us into page 360. So moving into page 360, Catelyn then notes that Donnell is a young man who is about 20 years old, and Donnell notes that if it were up to them, he would take 100 knights up to the mountains and take them out. Again, this really shows his youth and a lot of his inexperience. This would not go well, right? You're going to take 100 men into the clansmen, their own home territory. Yes, they may have, worse weaponry, worse armor, but you really think like 100 knights is going to be able to do it? Like, they're going to be hiding. They're going to be guerrilla warfare type style if you did that. And all these people will probably be killed. So it's again showing that kind of arrogance of the young. And it really reminds me of a lot of Waymar Royce. This is kind of the way he was at the very beginning of the story in the prologue. But more interestingly enough, we find out that Lysa forbid this, as well as letting any of her men participate in the hand's tourney. She wants all of her swords close by. Donnell has no idea what for, but then he apologizes, again, realizing that Cat is Lysa's sister, right? He shouldn't really be talking badly about Lysa, because that could get him into trouble, right? Catelyn tells Lysa, and then it's like, oh, okay, now you're out of favor. So again, don't want to let those kind of things slip. Now, Catelyn is fine with it because, he was speaking honestly and frankly and all that, but it is something that's interesting to think about here. Why, especially if you're someone that's living in the Vale, why is Lysa getting all these swords to her in a time of relative peace? That should be something that should be drawing up a lot of red flags, warning flags, that something is going to happen. And Lysa, we know, is involved with Littlefinger's plans to get things rolling. Now, does Lysa think that, Littlefinger's trying to get the Starks and the Lannisters into war? Who knows, right? I think Lysa is kind of just love-struck doing whatever Littlefinger wants and not really kind of figuring out the big picture. Now, Catelyn again notes that she knows why Lysa is bringing all these swords together, because she, fears the Lannisters. And this makes her remember about Tyrion. She thinks that Tyrion and Bronn have gotten much closer since Chigon has died. She thinks about how much Tyrion has gained since she has been taken prisoner. When he was first taken prisoner, he was, bound. He couldn't see anything. He had like a bag over his head. Now he has a dirk. He has an axe. He has a shadow skin cloak that he won off of the singer, and armor. Again, showing how Tyrion is very clever, how he's gained so much already, and he doesn't even really look like a prisoner, something the Blackfish will note later on. Catelyn then starts to question if Tyrion is really guilty after all. Tyrion shows no hint of fear even now, and she thinks on some of the logic he had told her in the last Tyrion chapter. But the one thing that Catelyn has to accept, and this is the biggest point here for me of Catelyn and why she isn't really willing to look at Tyrion's side here, is if Tyrion is right, and he is innocent after all, that means that Catelyn got 6 innocent men killed for literally no reason, if that's the case. She has kind of set the Lannisters against the Riverlands to take out, and let people die of her father's land. She is putting Ned in a horrible position, and she has the wrong person. This is all for naught. And she herself could have died. So, again, admitting that Tyrion could be innocent is really understanding that you got a lot of people killed. And that's something that Catelyn really cannot accept at this time. But the Catelyn then kind of puts all of this aside and her doubts aside to look to more pressing matters. She asks for Maester Coleman to be sent to her when they reach his keep. As Roderick has taken wounds and was very ill, towards the end they had to strap him to his horse. Bronn had said to leave him to his fate, but Catelyn would not allow it. Donnell tenses and says that Lysa has ordered Coleman to stay in the Eyrie for Robin's health. Again, a bit more foreshadowing to how Lysa is very protective of Robin, and also like Robin's just health in general. And also another thing to kind of note here is that Catelyn is also kind of feeling the guilt is that if Roderick dies as well, that's kind of on her conscience again. So a lot of things are kind of going on with Catelyn's mind right now, where you kind of have that battle again of emotion and logic that we talk about so much with Catelyn's character specifically, because she's kind of the forefront of that struggle. And this kind of chapter, it's not, you know, focusing on that specifically, like how past chapters have maybe been, but there it is still present, right? And how she does her actions and how she's viewing events right now. And that gets into page 361. Donnell notes that there is a Septon who can look after her wounded, which does not please Cat, right? Cat wants someone who has very steady hands, of a maester. Again, she's grown up with a good maester her whole life, whether that be in Riverrun or in Winterfell. And she was going to say this when she spots the bloody gate. It was put in between two mountain faces with two towers on either side and a bridge to get to it. Window slits for archers were everywhere, and the path was only large enough for 4 men across to pass. Again, this gives off the vibes that it would be extremely difficult to get here. Because I want you guys to think about this. If you're assaulting the Bloody Gate, you can only have 4 men across, right? It's going to be very difficult to miss your shot with an arrow when you're just scrunched in. There's nowhere to hide. And when you have all these window slits, you have a pretty sturdy gate, it seems like. This is a pass that it would take a ton of time and manpower to get through. It's one of the reasons when we look at like the idea of how were the Targaryens able to take this over? Well, they had a dragon. And when you look at, you know, when you look at Westeros as of right now, you know, Dany doesn't have the dragons yet. The Eyrie is someplace, and this is going to be something that's going to come up with Catelyn and Lysa's conversation at the end of the chapter, but the Vale and the Eyrie specifically, it's really impregnable. How would you take it out? Like, there's no real way of just forcing your way in. And that's something that it's just, we're going to be a constant theme. This is like the first obstacle of like 5 that would be extremely difficult to siege. But at this moment, Catelyn notes a man with a cloak of blue and red with a shiny black fish across his shoulder. And we know this as the Blackfish, or Brynden Tully. Well, again, something I want to kind of compare in the books to the show is, in my opinion, they kind of did the Blackfish dirty, not only just his death and things later on in the series, but specifically here. Like, he looks way more badass than the way he kind of looks in the show, where he's just like very dull looking. Like, his outfit is very dull looking. Like, here he is definitely kind of flamboyant, and that's not the Blackfish who he is, but he just looks very, very much the leader of this band of men here. The Blackfish calls who would pass the Bloody Gate. Donnell answers himself and Lady Catelyn. The Blackfish had thought he had recognized her and said she was a long way from home, as Catelyn responds, "And you, uncle, as well." Now, the Blackfish notes his home is to his back, very firmly, I might add. Again, playing on the idea that Catelyn notes his real home is Riverrun. And that's something that we're going to definitely see as we get, you know, further into the books after the Red Wedding. And, you know, the Blackfish is protecting his home kind of to the last man and not letting the Lannisters have it, or the Freys, I guess, specifically. And so, again, this is kind of a nice little wink or nod to that. And so it also, again, kind of just foreshadows that conflict as well between Hoster Tully and the Blackfish. Like, why is the Blackfish here, right? He's a Tully. Why is he in the Vale? And so that's another interesting question that, you know, will get paid off in this chapter as well. And Catelyn then has a nice little sweet remark where she says his home is in her heart. She asks him to remove his helm to see his face once again. And again, we're really just off of just this little interaction. This is something I love that George is able to do. We really understand how Catelyn and the Blackfish have a very good relationship, right? We haven't kind of seen that with Catelyn. She hasn't really had this like father figure, it kind of feels like, throughout the story so far. Like she has a good relationship with Hoster in her mind, but we haven't seen that. So it's just kind of nice for a character like Catelyn to have someone that, you know, she can get advice from, where it really hasn't felt like she's had that for the start of the books here. The Blackfish says time has not improved it, but Cat thinks differently, saying yes, age has kind of taken its toll. His hair is kind of grayed a little bit, but he still had the nice, you know, smile that she remembered from her childhood, and he still looked, again, the part of, you know, her uncle that she liked. And the Blackfish asks if Lysa knew they were coming, to which Catelyn responds there was no time, and that the storm is following them. Again, the storm referencing Tyrion, and on bringing kind of the Lannisters to their doorstep. Now, the Blackfish then allows them to pass through the Bloody Gate. And that gets us into page 362. So, continuing on, as Cat passes the gate, she takes in the beauty of the Vale. And this is something, again, we really didn't get in the show too much, is that the Vale is something that, it's not all just mountains and, you know, really hard passes and things like that. It has a lot of beauty to it. She notes that there's some lakes here, there's crops, and there's just kind of the splendor of the Vale. There's going to be a point later in the chapter where she notes, like, the one of the three fortresses that they go to, getting to the Eyrie, she's going to note, like, it's as beautiful as maybe even old Valyria was. So it really gives off this idea that the Vale is not just all bad, like we've kind of been led up to believe so far with, like, Tyrion. That is very beautiful as well. And we also get an idea that the Vale or the Eyrie specifically, has never really been sieged, right? No one has passed the Bloody Gate, no army. It had been tried in the Age of Heroes, but none had ever succeeded, which again shows, I think, really why, one, Lysa feels comfortable with just hiding in the Eyrie and in the Vale specifically, and two, I mean, how important it could be to have the Vale on your side as well. The Blackfish then notes, seeing that Catelyn is kind of stopped. She's just kind of paralyzed by the beauty of the Vale. The Blackfish says, if you look at kind of just the right angle, and you look up at the right angle, and just beyond the mountain known as Alyssa's Tears, that she may get a glimpse of the Eyrie's walls. And Catelyn at this moment remembers how Ned had told her that the Eyrie had 7 towers, and that standing on the parapets was like looking down into the clouds. And again, when we look at how, like, hard this journey is just to get to the Eyrie, it really gives off that vibe that we are literally living in the clouds. Like, we're just way up there. And it is really interesting. I've always thought, like, the Eyrie specifically is one of the most intriguing areas in all of Westeros. Just based on, like, how was this castle constructed? Like, think about how difficult it would have been building this castle, like getting materials up to where the Eyrie is to then build it. I just think it's, you know, fantastic that George had the imagination to build this area. Also, once again, subtly throwing into the idea that the Eyrie has 7 towers. Like, it's, again, very formidable as well, even though it may be smaller than a lot of the other major castles. Cat then asks how far of a ride till we get there, and the Blackfish notes that we could be at the mountain in a day, but the climb will take another day. At this moment, Roderick pipes up, saying he can't ride anymore, and Catelyn knows that he should not. He has done everything that she has asked for, and he should stay here and regain his strength. And this is kind of Catelyn kind of subtly just, like, telling anyone else that kind of, like, wanted to stay here, yeah, you can stay here. You don't got to keep coming. I don't need your protection type stuff. And that doesn't really go well for Catelyn. But that's going to get us into page 363. Donnell says he's honored to have him here and any who wish to remain. But with this, Marillion the Singer pipes up. And I think this is a very interesting, like, mini character arc for a character that's so minor at this point of the story. But he's a character that seemed like he lacked any type of courage. He was a complete coward, but now at this part of the end of the journey, he wants to go on. He wants to continue and wants to see it through. Catelyn is shocked by this. She had never asked for him to come along, but he had. And again, she even notes how so many others braver had died, and he had lived, she does not know. but he looks changed, more of a man now. He's kind of starting to get like a little bit of facial hair. He looks changed. So again, a nice little like mini character arc from Marillion. His fate is not great in the story, but at this point, it's just a nice little moment. She agrees to let him come, but at this, Bronn announces he shall come as well. Now, notice the difference here, where Marillion had asked for permission to come with Catelyn. Bronn says he's just going to come as well. He doesn't ask permission from Catelyn. He's just going to go. And Catelyn is not happy with this. She doesn't really like him. She doesn't trust him. Yes, he was a brave and he's a fierce warrior, and without him, they surely would have died. But again, he has no loyalty. He's a sellsword. And also, he was getting really buddy-buddy with Tyrion. That's something that Catelyn doesn't like, right? You don't want this guy that's, hanging around you to be really getting close with your prisoner. But the problem was with allowing Marillion, she could not graciously refuse Bronn to come, even though she didn't want him to. But she allows it all the same. Willis Woad, their last companion, also, he decides to remain. He doesn't want to come with them. But Donnell tells Cat he shall send word to the Eyrie of their coming, and that they were also provided with fresh mounts for the road, and were once again on the road again. Again, like I mentioned with this chapter, it's a lot of, journeying. It's a lot of, we need to get to this place by the end of this chapter so that George can have this conversation with Lysa and Catelyn that really lines up well with Littlefinger and Ned as they start into the next. So again, that was kind of the objective here from George, is he wanted that outcome. It's just, how do you pack all of that in? And so again, we have them, the first couple pages of this is getting to the Bloody Gate, and now we're going to have another journey here with the Blackfish, to then have another journey with Maya Stone, and then finally get to the Eyrie. So again, like I said, long chapter. So Catelyn, Bronn, Marillion, Tyrion, alongside Blackfish and 6 other of his men, then begin their journey. When after maybe a third of the way down the road, and being out of earshot of the others, the Blackfish asks what the storm is about, child. And Catelyn says she is no longer a child, but all the same, she tells him the story, albeit a bit slowly. And this kind of, again, tells us a lot about the Blackfish, and Catelyn's going to continue going on with who Brynden was for her in her childhood, but again, it establishes them having a really good relationship and very trusting relationship, that Catelyn can tell a lot of stuff here that I don't think she would tell, like, anyone. That she wouldn't tell anyone that, like, she didn't really trust. And so Cat, again, notes that the Blackfish had always been a good listener, except to her father, again, setting up that idea that the Blackfish and Hoster Tully do not have a great relationship. And Catelyn even expands on this, saying that two had always had issues, Brynden being 5 years younger than Hoster, that during one of their arguments, Hoster had called Brynden the black goat of the family. And Brynden had corrected him, saying he should be a Blackfish rather than a black goat, and ever since that day, he has taken it as his personal sigil. And the quarrels had never really ended, until Catelyn and Lysa had been wed. The Blackfish then made it known as his intent was to serve Jon Arryn, the husband of Lysa, and that was the end of it. Edmure had then told Catelyn in letters that Hoster had never spoken his name since. Again, we don't really fully get to why they had their arguments, but again, setting up that relationship. But then Catelyn gets to, I think, the most interesting part of the Blackfish's character, which not only establishes kind of who Catelyn's parents were to her, but also who the Blackfish was to a lot of people at Riverrun in their younger days. Catelyn notes that through everything, it was always the Blackfish that the Tully children and even Peter Baelish had gone to with their issues, not Hoster. Because Hoster was always busy and their mother was ill. He would listen to their childish issues or their great triumphs. Again, it really kind of points to this idea of Blackfish being kind of the real father figure for a lot of these characters. And even Littlefinger. I think Littlefinger is a very interesting character where he kind of grew up, in Riverrun. And so the Blackfish kind of would have been someone that Littlefinger would have looked up to, alongside of people like Edmure, like Lysa. And so it's very interesting to think about how that would have molded each of those individuals, because the Blackfish is a character that inherently is much different than all four of them, right? I think the Blackfish is someone that's kind of more of a dry, sterner type. He's kind of like Stannis. He does have a little bit more humor to him and things like that. But none of those people kind of turn out like him, right? Which I think is very interesting. But it's also telling that Hoster was someone that I think was someone that cared more about, I think, ruling and things of that nature than, actually being a good father to his children. That's something we see a lot. And I'm not saying Hoster is necessarily a bad parent, but he doesn't seem like he was the most attentive to his children. And maybe that's why we can see things like Littlefinger sleeping with Lysa, that whole relationship starting, Littlefinger constantly going after Catelyn. Maybe that was because Hoster just wasn't present in there to kind of separate that before it became an issue and something that would impact the kingdoms forever. And Catelyn, kind of going back into the present, when her tale was done, the Blackfish says that your lord father must know of this. If war is brewing, Winterfell is remote and again out of the way. And also it has Moat Cailin, right? It would be incredibly difficult to siege, and Tywin, in my opinion, at this point, would be a fool to even try it. And the Vale, again, has its mountains to protect it. Again, also, you'd be a fool to try and attack them at this point. So what lies is Riverrun. It's in the center. It doesn't have these great advantages of, geographical defenses. It's in the middle. It's an easy target. We see this countless times. With the Dance of the Dragons, the Riverlands get, again, bloodied. We see Aemond just destroying whole keeps and castles and things like that during the dance. That is something that's very important. And we see something very similar to Ned, is that the Blackfish thinks in military. He understands what things are going to happen. He understands the chessboard when it comes to military thinking. Maybe not politically. He understands how to be a military general and leader. That is something that's going to be crucial for Robb's campaign. That'll get us into page 365. So moving into page 365, Catelyn then admits she has the same fears. Again, understanding how she understands the consequences of her actions, but it's too late in this matter, right? She's already made the decision. As soon as she captured Tyrion, there was no going back at that point. If she goes back, it defeats the entire purpose. And that's something that I think makes Catelyn a very interesting character, where she's not stupid. She understands. She's not this character where she does something and is like, whoa, wait, that could have happened. No, she understands it. It's just she's made the bad decision and it's now caused a lot of all of these problems. She then says she must have Maester Coleman send a raven to, again, warn the North. Ned had given her a bunch of commands to prepare the North for war, and she didn't do it. She did this whole mission with Tyrion and going to the Vale and all this. This is the problem. Ned did not. Ned could have sent this in a raven if he wanted to the North. He didn't want that. He wanted Catelyn to take over charge to get the North ready, not having to rely on his bannermen or his lords to do this. Catelyn was supposed to do it. That's the problem here. And when we look at, Catelyn's biggest mistakes, biggest fails, this is one of those things, right? If the North had been more prepared for war, things like Robb preparing the North to come south would not have taken nearly as long, right? We know one of the things that, Robb ends up doing is he doesn't have the full army or full support of the North when he goes south, because they're in a time stretch at this point. They need to get south to free Ned, right? Ned is not dead when they come south. The whole point of them coming south was to get him out. And so this is just a very big point, right? Where if Catelyn's there to do this, things could have gone maybe much differently. And again, the big thing here is not allowing the Lannisters to catch them first or get the first action in war. That's also the biggest point as well here. Catelyn then asks what the mood in the Vale is, and the Blackfish says they're angry, which tells you really all you need to know about the Vale at this point. Because if you're someone, again, I've made this point earlier in the video, but if you're someone in the Vale, you have Lysa, who's fled back to the Vale. She's not allowing any of her knights to participate in the Hands tournament. Jon Arryn has died. There's a lot of, There's a lot of uncertainty surrounding Robin Arryn, who is sickly, who is weak, who's a child leader. And something we're going to talk about with Roose Bolton specifically is a child lord is the death of a house. I think a lot of people in the Vale are thinking that right now. And so you have a lot of that. And then you have people suspecting maybe somebody did kill Jon Arryn. There's a lot of stuff going on right now. And this is something that, like, the Blackfish carefully brings up. Again, saying that Robert is 6 and sickly and weak. He cries the slightest thing. Many have whispered that Nestor Royce, who has been High Steward for 14 years for Jon Arryn, should rule for now, or that Lysa must remarry, and the suitors are lining up. Which, again, makes a ton of sense, right? If you're Lysa, I think it makes logical sense to remarry. From a political standpoint, you want to strengthen, again, your hold on the Vale, and things of that nature. Also, you're going to have people trying to climb the ladder, gain power for their house. And so it makes sense from that point of view. But when you look at the point of view of Lysa, who is this really unfortunate girl or woman as she's grown up, she's had a very bad life. I mean, yes, she lives in, privilege of being a highborn lady, but, she marries kind of an older guy. It's not like Prince Charming. They don't really have a loving relationship. And, she has problems with stillborns, miscarriages. She doesn't really have a lot in her life. She's not a happy person. The Eyrie is a place that we constantly see with a character like Sansa, and even Catelyn later in the chapter, where the Eyrie feels very empty. It's not a place, you would want to live. And I know Lysa spent most of her time at court, and that can be its own different type of hell. If you're Lysa and you're someone that's having all of these issues and you're constantly hearing people whisper behind your back and something like that, I think, Lysa, when we get to her, when Catelyn meets her, it's very understandable the way, she has been manipulated and the way she's kind of fallen from grace. I think it makes a lot of sense. Now, Cat is not surprised by this news, as Lysa was still young, but she asks Blackfish if she does intend to, which is a very interesting question. Because Blackfish says that, yes, she has said she intends to, but she is waiting for the right suitor. Now, Catelyn says, Blackfish, you must relate to that, because that's one of the big issues with Hoster and the Blackfish, is that Hoster wanted the Blackfish to marry, and he did not want to. So, again, he agrees to this, but he also kind of calls out Lysa's bullshit. There have been many suitors, and Nestor Royce, the head of them, and she has denied all of them. He believes that Lysa is just playing with them, and I kind of added on with the Blackfish's sentiment that she's playing for appearances, right? She has to give the look that, yeah, I'm going to remarry just so people don't get upset and things of that nature, kind of keep them under her thumb for a while, buy some time. And again, I think her plan to rule until Robin comes of age makes sense from Lysa's point of view as well. And that gets us into page 366. So moving into page 366, Cat then pipes up saying that a woman can rule as wisely as a man, which again is true. We've seen this for different ladies that are ruling. Alysanne being probably the best queen, and if she was ruling on her own right, would be better than majority of the Targaryen kings. So again, that's a true statement. But the Blackfish agrees, but he is wise and says the right woman can. And he hesitates, but says Lysa is not that. And specifically, he says that Lysa is not Catelyn, and that you may not find her as useful as you would like, which is interesting, because it shows that the Blackfish very much thinks that Cat can rule, which I agree to disagree with. Catelyn is a character that I think would be actually really good when it came to settling matters that didn't involve her or her family. Like, say you had two farmers and they were having disputes on, land or something of that nature. I think Catelyn would actually be fairly logical. I think she would be very, wise in that part of it. But when it came to the idea of anything that revolved around her children, anything that impacted her, I don't think she would be that great. She would be someone that would, again, base a lot of her decisions on her emotion and not, logically or what's good for her people. And that's something that I think is not good for Catelyn. But again, it shows, their good relationship with Blackfish and Cat. Catelyn then asks what he means, and Blackfish says King's Landing changed her. And I kind of already talked about this, so I'm not going to retread it, but her marriage has not been good. and, you know, the problems with childbirth and things of that nature, it's kind of made her latch on to Robin. This is the only thing she has. Her husband's dead. She has no children outside of him. She's being very overly protective of him. And think about why, you know, she flees King's Landing. Now, one of the reasons is she kills Jon Arryn. She wants to avoid suspicion and get out. Two, again, it's kind of a setup to show that, oh, maybe the Lannisters did it and kind of convince Ned and all that. But it's also the idea that she didn't want Robin being fostered off to the Lannisters. Which, again, I think is completely understandable from Lysa's point of view on not wanting that. Why would you want the only part of your family being taken away from you and your child who's only 6? The Blackfish continues saying Lysa is afraid and scared and ran to the Vale to hide from the Lannisters. And here you bring a Lannister to her doorstep. And I added on to this, basically bringing the Vale into any war that's about to happen. You take the captive that this war is going to be, again, started over, because Tywin, again, is going to kind of start invading the Riverlands. This is why. You drag the Vale directly into it. And so that's the Blackfish's point, right? Blackfish is not saying that Lysa's making rational choices or decisions, but he's kind of providing what her POV of this is going to be, and he's exactly spot on. When we get to Lysa and Catelyn's conversation, the Blackfish is basically telling us right now what she's going to say. Catelyn then notes that the Lannister is in chains, and the Blackfish looks and says, really? Again, looking at him, he doesn't look like this at all. He looks like just a companion. He is fully armed, and he has armor, and he's not in chains or anything like that. Catelyn then notes that he is here, and that is all that matters. He is my prisoner, and Lysa, as well as I, will want to question him, as it was her husband the Lannisters killed. Blackfish says he hopes that she is right in a tone that did not show that he thought she was right. Again, showing more and more that Catelyn has severely fucked up. And that'll get us into page 367. Starting page 367, we get the day continuing as they made it to a valley where for the first time Catelyn saw the grasses and flowers that grew up here. Again, just showing off some of the more natural beauty of the Vale and all of that. This valley made the road easier, and they made good time. They passed many farmers or others on the road, as they were near farms and wheat fields. All the while, the Blackfish had the banner presented in front of them of House Arryn's sigil, and below his own Blackfish. And at this, it was night before they reached the Gate of the Moon, as Blackfish had told her this was the seat of Nestor Royce, and he had been expecting them as fires are seen and such. Catelyn then looks up, and way above, she can see the Eyrie. Tyrion then notes, we aren't climbing this at night. I would rather you kill me here. Blackfish says they will spend the night here, and Tyrion asks, how would we even get up there? To which the Blackfish says, by mule, which is, again, great setup, because we know that Catelyn is actually going to have to make this ascent at night, which Lysa is just insane for. And two, again, it's really showing this idea that, one, if you're looking at the lords of the Vale, the Arryns specifically, it really gives off this idea that the Arryns are like above everyone else and they're looking down on you. It's a nice little like theme that I really like for the Eyrie as well. It really gives off that idea that if you're a common person, that the Eyrie is always there, right? It's always overlooking you. And I think that's a nice little parallel as well. When we get to this idea that, you know, the High Lords and the High Ladies and all these use the common people as kind of their puppets. But that gets us into page 368. Catelyn then remembers what Ned had told her during his youth and says that the way up has steps carved into them. Which is another interesting point that, like, it kind of gives me vibes of kind of the Wall. If you think about kind of the paths along top of the Wall and things like that, it really gives me those vibes. The Blackfish agrees and notes that the horses cannot take them because they are too steep and narrow, but mules will take them up to each of the 3 way castles until they reach the top one, Sky. Tyrion says, and what after that? Now, again, I want to point this out. If you're an invading army, not only do you have to bring horses just to even get to the Vale, right? Now you're also going to have like an army of mules to then get up to each one of these 3 individual castles, which in their own right are heavily like defended. The hassle of actually trying to invade the Eyrie, you would lose so many men. Think about it. You have to pass 2 different gates. You then have to take out 3 different, like, tower, fortress, keeps type stuff as you go up. All while you kind of have to go. It's not a very wide, like, you can't have a bunch of men. Like, if you're coming up, it's going to be an easy shot to hit you. And so that's all kind of part of this idea. Blackfish then says you will have to go on foot, or you could be carried in a basket, as Sky is right below the Eyrie, and could have it arranged for him to be carried up with the food and supplies. Now, I want you guys to remember this part because it will come back later in the chapter. Tyrion says best not to. His father would hate him for him to go with his fate, go to his fate with the turnips, and that if the others will walk, so he must. The Lannisters do have a certain pride. Right away, this kind of upsets Catelyn. As she says pride, Catelyn calls it arrogance, avarice. I don't know how to say this word that Catelyn says, and I looked it up because I didn't know what it was. So for anyone that wants to know what she's like talking about with this word of avarice, it basically means wealth or greed. And also a lust for power is the last thing that Catelyn says about the Lannisters. Now, Tyrion agrees that Jaime, Tywin, and Cersei all fit into one of those very well. But something I really want to note here is that while Tyrion says this next line, he says it again in a mocking way, and in just a way that, again, makes him very unlikable to people that already don't like him. But he says that he is an innocent soul, grinning the whole time. Again, it's this idea that Tyrion plays into this character, right, that he talks about, that, you know, don't shy away from what people think you are, what they call you. That's what his advice to Jon is. And I think Tyrion just takes it too far, and it gets him into trouble a lot of times. But at this moment, the drawbridge of the Gate of the Moon comes down, and men with torches come out with Nestor Royce. Catelyn notes that he is a barrel-chested man. He bows to her, and Cat notes the clumsy bow. Cat dismounts and responds curtly, and she notes how she knew of him from being a lower branch of House Royce and a cousin to Bronze Jan Royce, albeit still a formidable lord in his own right. That will get us into page 369. So in page 369, Cat then asks for safe passage and to stay the night as their journey has been taxing. Nestor agrees to this, but says that Lysa has requested Cat's presence immediately. Now, this to me makes no sense. Why in the hell, this should tell you that Lysa is not in the right mind here. What does it matter if Catelyn gets there tomorrow? Whether it's instead of like this night, or, well, they're gonna arrive like in the morning, more or less. But what does it matter? The Lannisters are going to have found out about this anyway, and maybe they're coming for the Vale. Definitely aren't. This is like, it's inviting Catelyn to die, is what it's doing. You're gonna travel this very dangerous path up to this mountain at night. Now, they're lucky they have Maya Stone, and she's a fantastic guide, but this is really dumb. And the Blackfish calls this out. And he says, what is this madness? Cat notes that he was always a very blunt man, again, kind of the Stannis vibes. Blackfish continues stating that she is inviting Catelyn to break her neck. He is interrupted by Maya Stone, who says, the mules know the way. Maya, again, is described as a girl of 16 or 17 years of age with short cropped brown hair with riding leathers on. She then bows more gracefully than Nestor to Cat and says, it will be my honor to take you up, and that no harm would come to her, as she has made the climb up at night 100 times, and that her father must have been half a goat. Maybe not half a goat, but he was a stag. Again, Catelyn doesn't know this, but we all know that this is the bastard daughter of Robert Baratheon. Cat notes her cockiness, which makes her smile, and asks for her name, to which she replies, Maya Stone. And this instantly gets Cat feeling angry and guilty all at the same time, as it reminds her of Jon Snow and how he is at the wall. And again, it just brings up these feelings that Ned slept with another woman and then also brought the child to be raised with her own. That's just something that Catelyn can't get over. We also learn, or I guess are reinforced, that bastards have different names in each of the kingdoms, like flowers in the Reach, the Snow, which is the north, and then the Stone, which is the Vale. Before she can reply, Nestor says Maya is a clever girl and has not failed him yet. She will not fail now. Catelyn then says she puts herself in Maya's hands and asks that Nestor keep a close guard on Tyrion. Now, what I think is weird is that I think this would be a great place to end the chapter if I was George. Like, it's like we've had already like a number of journeys, right? The journey to the Bloody Gate at the very beginning, and then we've had the journey to the Moon Gate. Now we're gonna have another one. We have another journey to the Eyrie, in which we're gonna go through 3 different castles. It's, to me, this is the part where I love this chapter, and it has a lot of great stuff, especially for Catelyn's backstory, for House Tully, the Vale, House Aaron, and we meet a bunch of different characters. But in my opinion, this is where I would have separated this chapter. But let me know what you guys think, and let's continue. Again, we are only about a little over halfway into this chapter. So again, like I said, it's gonna be a very long video. So getting into page 370, Tyrion then jumps in saying he would want some food and wine before he dies of hunger, and maybe a woman too, to which Bronn laughs at. Nestor ignores Tyrion and orders him to be taken to a tower cell, but he does kind of agree, and gives him meat and mead for him to enjoy. Catelyn then took her leave with Maya, and the two found 2 mules already saddled and waiting for them. Maya helps Catelyn onto her saddle, and a guardsman opens the postern gate for them. Catelyn saw the pines and wall of mountain in front of them. Again, it's going to be a very difficult journey, and especially at night. I mean, think about this journey during the day, right? It's something we're going to see with Sansa later on, but Catelyn's doing this at night. After you've been riding all day long, she hasn't had a break, really kind of puts into perspective how caring Lysa is about her family, and then you consider she also killed her husband. So, Maya tries to give Cat some advice, saying some people prefer to close their eyes, as some people, if they do not, grip their mules too hard from fright. Cat responds, she was born a Tully and she wed a Stark. She does not frighten easily, and asks if she planned to light a torch. Which is an interesting question, right? One, it's like we're traveling at night. How are we going to see the ground? And I think Maya, for one, knows that the mules can kind of do this by themselves. They don't really need us. And 2, she's going to note that the torches actually will impair their vision. They'll kind of be blinded. If you've ever, for instance, been in a classroom, this is something I've noticed when I was younger. If you're ever just like in the dark, say you're watching a movie or this, and then somebody instantly just, flashes the lights, well, now you're blinded. That's kind of what Maya is talking about. And also light, a torch at night, it can be very deceiving as on what the ground looks like and things of that nature. Now, something also that's very interesting here is that Catelyn responds, she does not frighten easily. It's going to come back to bite her when we see a moment in this chapter where Catelyn is basically frozen with fear. And that's going to be an interesting point we'll get to later on in the chapter. And Maya also notes that she has the eyes of an owl, or Michael has told her. Cat asks that she has mentioned this Michael before, and Maya explains that it is her love. He is Michael Redfort. He's squire to Lynn Corbray, and that once he is knighted, they are set to marry. Now, this reminds Catelyn a lot of Sansa, again dreaming of her love, and eventually when she's this lady and she has her Prince Charming type stuff. But Catelyn kind of thinks like this is never going to happen, right? Maya is so innocent that she doesn't understand. Like, Maya as a bastard will never be able to marry any of these people from high places like the Redforts. Now, something that is interesting to consider here is that Maya Stone is the bastard of our Baratheon, and that inherently makes her a bastard that's much higher than all the rest. It's very similar to like Jon at Winterfell, where yes, he is a bastard, but he still does have a place with the Starks, and he, eats with them, he trains with them, he has given certain privileges, and that's kind of the same with Maya. So it's interesting the way we look at that. But Catelyn doesn't know that this is Robert Baratheon's bastard. Neither do we, the audience, at this point. We can kind of start to put it together in the next chapter with Ned, because there's a little bit of an emphasis on it. But yeah, as of right now, we do not know. But that will get us into page 371. So continuing on, as the journey was coming easy to Catelyn, and even faster than she dared hope, as this stair so far was covered with trees. So again, it was kind of blocking out the wind. It seemed like the ground wasn't too bad. And so far, this was very pleasant. Catelyn was having so much of an easy time that she kind of begins to fight off sleep. And she notes that she may have dozed off, and she probably did, as we don't really get much description until we get a little bit like later towards the first castle. But eventually, Maya points out the first of the 3 castles to the Eyrie. In the castle stone. Maya dismounts cheerfully, and the gates of the castle were opened, and the man inside greeted them well and offered them charred meat and onion on a skewer, to which Catelyn takes quickly. She kind of hadn't noticed how hungry she was until this moment, so we get a nice little rest from the journeying. After this, they set off in a fresh mules, and this time the going was not so easy. The path was much more worn, it was steeper, and multiple times Maya had to stop to take rocks off the path so that the mules would not break a leg. Up here, Catelyn could really feel the altitude. The trees were more sparse, so the wind was hitting them more. You kind of really felt how you were higher up on this mountain. And as they reached the second stopping place, this one was a little more than a fortified tower and a timber keep that was called Snow. And that will get us into page 372. So moving on, Catelyn notes that while it didn't seem impressive, it did do its job, assuming anyone actually made it this far, that if you were attacking this right, you would have to climb stone by stone while getting arrow fire from this keep, making it, again, very difficult to assault. That's kind of the common theme with the path to the Eyrie, is there's just so many different roadblocks that seem nearly impossible to take. It's just, again, it continues to show how there's no real reason to ever attack the Eyrie unless you kind of have a dragon or you have maybe an inside man that's helping you get through all these obstacles. But yeah, straight up assaulting it is just suicide. But the young man in charge offered them bread and cheese and offered to let them warm by the fire, but Maya suggested continuing on. And so Catelyn agrees to keep going. So again, we go swiftly through the castle Snow, which is a nice little maybe reference of how, again, Catelyn doesn't like Jon Snow, and she wouldn't want to linger on this castle anyway, like she doesn't really want Jon Snow to be around. Catelyn is then given a fresh mule named Whitey, who Maya says is a very sure-footed, even in ice. But if he didn't like you, he tended to kick. Thankfully, the mule seemed to like her, and there was no ice. But Maya says that this is where the snow and ice began, but she notes she has never seen ice or snow this far down the mountain. Again, Catelyn is just thinking about Sansa once again, because Maya is, again, around kind of that age of Sansa. They're still very both young and innocent and having kind of these thoughts. And so it just does remind Catelyn a lot of her daughter. And even Catelyn kind of thinks about the Stark words, right? Here we have, Maya talking about the snows, and Catelyn lives in the north, right? She has experienced winters, whereas Maya, her whole life has really been in summer. So Catelyn kind of almost, says the Stark words, winter is coming type thing. But she refrains, and she notes that maybe she is getting more Stark-like. I would disagree, but, she can think it all the best she would like. Above the keep Snow, the wind was even worse than before, and Catelyn felt as though she could almost touch the stars. Again, the higher you get up, the wind is getting worse. You have less things blocking the wind, whereas, a little bit further down, you had things like trees. We might have had other mountains that were kind of maybe blocking that wind. But here, there is none of that, and so you're feeling it even more. Not only is it going to be windier, but it's also going to be colder. Eventually, they get to a place where Maya stops her, and says it's better to lead the mules across. And Catelyn looks out and sees a 20-foot-long path ahead, but it is only 3 feet wide, with a terrible drop on either side. Now, it's a little interesting that you might have thought maybe like the Vale or the Eyrie specifically, why didn't they make this like little part of this trail a little bit more accessible? Like, this just seems prone to accidents, because like 3 feet along is not very long. Think about it, right? That is one, if you're going off of American terms, that is 1 yard. Like that is basically half of my body across. It's a little over half, but you get the point. That's scary. As someone that, to me, I'm afraid of heights. Not as bad as I used to be when I was younger, but I'm still like, you will never see me like skydiving, anything like that. I'd have to be like stuffed in a sack and just thrown out. Like, there's just no way. I'd fight to the death. But yeah, this is a moment where Catelyn is like kind of eating her words when it comes to being frightened. But that gets us into page 373. So, as we see Maya Stone lead her mule across gracefully and easily, again, she's done this hundreds of times, it's not really a big deal for her. It was now Catelyn's turn. She took one step, and then the fear took her. The wind had picked up even more, and the fear of the dark pits and the fall on either side stuck in her head. Catelyn felt like the wind was trying to knock her off the cliff. And I kind of thought maybe this is a metaphor, right? We know that Lysa does not want Catelyn to be here with Tyrion. Maybe this is the veil and this the natural geography telling her she isn't wanted. And again, I just want to point out, right? Like, I sympathize a lot here with Catelyn. Like, you take that first step and it's like, well, if you shut your eyes, it's like, okay, I don't really have much walking room to begin with. This is still scary as hell. And she's basically just paralyzed. She's trembling and tries to take a step back, but then her escape is blocked because, again, she is leading her mule across. She even thinks that she is going to die here. Again, showing how dire the situation seems like for Catelyn. Maya then calls out if she is well, and Cat says that she cannot do this. Maya says she knows she can. Look how wide the path is. And that is like the worst thing to say to someone that's like afraid of heights. Or it's like, yeah, look down. Look how wide this path is. It's like, it's literally not that wide, like at all. And so you get to this point where Catelyn is just doesn't want to look. That's what she says. And Maya says that she will come back for her. And foot by foot, Catelyn made it across with Whitey the mule following behind. And Catelyn and Maya then approach the third way castle named Sky, as it's, again, very high up in the sky. Finally, the snow is starting to poke through, and Catelyn notes that there was no prettier sight, even in old Valyria, than Sky right now. The way castle was described as a crescent-shaped, unmortared stone alongside the mountain face. Again, another key position that it would be very easy to defend if you were a defender. And again, that's very high praise. No prettier sight, even in old Valyria. Again, showing off the beauty of the Vale that I wish we had gotten to see more of, whether that be in Game of Thrones or even something like House of the Dragon, which we never really saw. Once inside, they noticed dawn was breaking in the east. And also once within Sky, they noticed there was many ramps and stones and boulders that could be used to cast down upon any foes approaching the Way Castle. So now you have a different approach, right? Say you're coming up, right? You've been expecting now that let's say you've made it to Sky and you're sitting here and you're going, okay, well, we're going to fight, heavy arrow fire. No, they're just going to send boulders down the side of the mountain and kill you. And that's regarding how long it even takes you to get through this little path that Catelyn and Maya just went through. It's just, again, I just want to really paint the picture for you guys how difficult it is to have even brought an army to the Eyrie. The guards then within let Catelyn know that this is the farthest the mules can go, and the rest of the way will be more like a stone ladder than a path. Either way, they should reach the Eyrie in an hour. Catelyn, then thinking about this and looking up, she realizes that the Eyrie was no more than 600 feet above them. And thinking back on her uncle's words, she decides to instead go and ride up with the turnips. Again, we kind of see how Catelyn was kind of making fun of Tyrion on this idea, and even the Blackfish was kind of jesting with Tyrion, but here's Catelyn now experiencing this firsthand, decides to go up with the turnips. I think it's a nice little interesting switch, and we see this a lot with Catelyn and say Tyrion, where it's been this play on their personalities. I really love this. And Catelyn even like has the gall to say, you know, the Lannisters may have their pride, but the Tullys have their better sense, which is interesting because I would actually say, given the two characters, it's actually quite the opposite. Tyrion is someone that has much better sense than someone like Catelyn does, whereas Catelyn has a lot more pride. So I'd actually flip that. But that is a very interesting statement that Catelyn kind of thinks about. But by the time that she, again, we get a nice little like time skip here, but by the time she reached the Eyrie, the sun was high up in the sky with the mountains. She was greeted by Sir Vardis, head of Lord Arryn's household guard, with his falcon-crested breastplate, and Maester Coleman, who had the honor of greeting her and such. More importantly, they say that Lysa was to be awakened as soon as she arrived. Again, Catelyn's been basically traveling at night, not being able to rest, while Lysa has had the comfort of sleeping in her bed. And Catelyn notes this exact thing and says it very bitterly, but saying, I hope she had a good night's sleep. Again, this basically goes straight through Vardis and Coleman. Neither one of them really seem to pick up on it from Catelyn's point of view, but she was led throughout the castle. And Catelyn notes how small the castle is in comparison to other great castles. It had 7 great towers that Ned said could host 500 men, but also to note the Eyrie has no need of smithers or granaries or a stable. Either way, Cat can't help but think the castle feels empty. Again, let's just think about the Eyrie here for a second. You can't even get a mule up to this castle. You have to take like a stone ladder or come with the food, basically in a like pulley type system, I would assume. So how would you even attack this castle? You're thinking about 500 men just looking at like a certain spot that is the only way you can come up, and you're going to be dismounted. I just really want to put that into your guys' head. But yeah, and another thing we look at here is Catelyn thinks the castle feels empty. Now think about it when we look at Lysa, who's a character that very much feels very alone outside of Robin. And if Robin had been taken from her, think about what that would have done to her psychologically. And it just really goes to kind of paint that nice picture of who Lysa kind of is as a character. But that'll get us into page 375. I think I mixed up page 373 and 374. So yeah, but should be on page 375 now. But as she entered into her solar, Lysa was still in her bedclothes with a maid brushing out her long auburn hair. As Cat enters, Lysa seems pleased to see her and rushes to greet her and hugs her and asks how long it has been and notes it has been too long. Again, she does all of this without really Catelyn even saying a thing. But Catelyn notes that it had been 5 years in truth, but Lysa looked terrible. Her blue eyes now looked watery. She had grown plumper or fatter and even looked older than Catelyn, even though she was younger than her by 2 years. We really get this idea that Lysa, again, has been indulging herself quite a lot, like we'll see with Cersei later on in the story. She is someone that I think has had much more stresses. She's had much more stress in her life. She has had a bunch of failed pregnancies and stillborns. She is someone that just has not aged particularly well. And Catelyn even notes that she's nothing like the girl that Catelyn had stood next to when they both had been wedded. Catelyn then lies, saying she looks well, but a bit tired, which is ironic given what Cat has been through. And Lysa then breaks the embrace, noticing the people in the room and tells them to leave. All the while, Lysa is holding Cat's hand. And this is where we have the big shift. As soon as the door closed, Lysa completely changed. But I want to note, this is interesting that lines up with the idea of Lysa being able to, manipulate people, keep up these lies, she was the one that kills her husband. She is able to really play this loving sister role with Catelyn in front of other people really, really well. Lysa then asks if Catelyn has had a leave of her senses, drawing them into her quarrels with the Lannisters. Which, again, I want to point out, I know Lysa, led them down the trail of the Lannister issue, but is Lysa, really wrong here? I mean, Catelyn really just thrust the veil into again, it seems like open war with the Lannisters. You bring a kidnapped Lannister to the Eyrie. You put Lysa in a really weird position, and nothing that Lysa has really shown to Catelyn, whether through this letter or just inferring things, would lead you to believe that Lysa would want Tyrion here. She is someone that obviously is afraid. She's someone that wants to get away from the Lannisters. So again, Catelyn bringing Lysa, again, it just doesn't really add up or make sense. And it's something that Catelyn really didn't think about initially when she was forming her plan of capturing Tyrion. And again, I think another thing that we look at here is that, yes, people might have been suspicious of Lysa when she, retreats to the Vale, but that's all they are, right? They're just suspicions. And even if you look at, Lysa's point of view, she can have her suspicions of the Lannisters, what they did, and things of that nature. But now you're pulling the Vale kind of into war, even though the Vale will not go into war. That's kind of what she's doing. So yeah, I just wanted to note that. Now, Cat responds angrily that it was her who had quarrels first with them, as she had sent the letter about Jon being killed. Lysa responds to warn them not to fight them. At this moment, they are interrupted as Robin Arryn enters, calling for his mother, holding a doll. Again, I think this is an interesting point, right, where Lysa is someone that doesn't want to fight the Lannisters, and I think Catelyn completely misconstrued what that was going on. So now you're sitting here, right, if you're Catelyn, right, and your sister tells you, I didn't want you to fight them. I wanted you to avoid them. Now you're sitting here going, okay, well, Catelyn's the one that pushed Ned to go to be Hand of the King, something he didn't want to do. So we already talked about in this chapter how Catelyn's responsible for all of the people that she has gotten involved with capturing Tyrion, but now this even goes back to even further. It goes back to all of the people that are now in King's Landing. It goes to Ned. It goes to Sansa, Arya, all of these people that are in King's Landing, basically because Catelyn pushed Ned to take the Hand of the King position when Ned didn't want to. And that's something that, as the story goes on, and we do see people like Ned dying, like Jory dying, like people, all of basically the Stark household that went to King's Landing dying, it's kind of on Catelyn to a degree. And Lysa is kind of putting a lot of that guilt on Catelyn here that, Catelyn will have to deal with as the story goes on. Now, getting into page 376, Catelyn notes that he is painfully small and thin and sickly near all of his days, with what they called the shaking sickness. Robin said he had heard voices, to which is no wonder because Lysa at this point had been shouting. Lysa says, "You remember your aunt, Lady Stark?" He thinks he remembers her, but Catelyn kind of disagrees, saying like the last time Cat had seen him, he was like around a year old. But then we get even more and more foreshadowing as Lysa notes how strong and beautiful Robin is. Again, this idea that Jon on his deathbed kept saying that Robert, the seed, is strong, and to tell them, which Lysa obviously is going to construe this as, their child is strong. And that's not what he meant. And even a blind man would know Robin Arryn is not a strong child. He is the opposite of that. He's very weak. And that is something where, as a reader, I don't think a lot of us maybe initially thought this, like, oh, wait, hold on a second. He was talking about Robert Baratheon and his children all being, not his, right? So that's something I think is massive foreshadowing. And then we go into Ned in the next chapter, and he finds another one of the bastards of Robert. This is something that needs to be kept in mind. And one of the reasons why this chapter is so long is because George wanted this conversation to happen before the next Ned chapter. And so this chapter kind of goes on. It feels like almost a 3-part chapter because there's almost 3 different parts of it. But yeah, Catelyn tries to pull the conversation back, saying that if what she says about the Lannisters is true, we must act. Lysa tries to cut her off, saying not in front of Robin, but Catelyn continues, saying he is the Lord of the Vale, and Ned thinks it may come to war. Again, Catelyn is in the right of this, right? Robin is someone that needs to grow up. He is the person that albeit is going to be in charge of the Vale. He has to be able to hear these things. And when you look at a character like Robb, for instance, who is growing up much faster than he should, or because he has to step up, you look at the way Catelyn is going to kind of project that onto Robin a bit, because Robin needs to. Now, there's a massive age difference between the two, but still. Look at Bran, for instance, as a character that needs to kind of grow up as well. and kind of fit into that role, especially when Robb leaves. Lysa then tells her to be quiet, snapping at her, and that you are scaring Robert, who can't even look at Catelyn or starts to tremble. Lysa tells him to not be afraid and slips out her breast, and Robin eagerly starts sucking on it. Again, Robin is 6 years old, and we're still doing breastfeeding. Very unnatural, especially for Westeros at this point, and Catelyn reacts this way. Catelyn's at a loss of words. She remembered Rickon in this moment, and while Rickon was half the age of Robin, again, Rickon's only 3 at this point, he was 5 times fiercer than Robin. She now understood why Robin was to be separated from his mother as she babied him. And again, I think Robb and Arryn going to someone like Stannis Baratheon would have been much better than someone like Tywin. Again, just putting all of the power with the Lannisters is not a good move, and moving someone like Robin to Stannis would have been a great move. It wouldn't have happened either way because, again, Lysa just is not willing to get rid of her children. The only thing she has being Robb and Arryn. And we see this multiple times throughout the series of this major theme of a mother's love. And so, yeah, I just think the way that she is babying him is enabling him to be the way that he is. Lysa then says to either Catelyn or Robin, really she's just kind of speaking into the air, that the Vale is safe. Catelyn notes, do not be a fool, no one is safe if the Lannisters attack, which I again completely disagree with. The Vale is completely fine, right? Maybe some of the outer king, some of her, bannermen may go under attack, but Lysa herself really has nothing to fear. Like, unless there's some sort of like revolt within the Eyrie, she's completely fine. Nobody's going to be able to take this. Tywin's not a fool, right? Tywin is not going to do that. If Tywin would do anything, it would be Tywin would basically siege the Eyrie, cut them off from food, and eventually they'd maybe starve out or have to bend the knee or something like that. But again, I completely disagree. Lysa has a pretty good plan. It's not the best plan, but Lysa can sit here, do nothing, and she would be fine. Now, will I say that I think Lysa should have backed Robb and things probably would have gone much better for her family? Yeah, but that's not what ends up happening. So, Catelyn then begins to understand why the Vale is so angry and what her uncle was trying to warn her of. Lysa then thinks about what she is going to do with the imp at this point, and this is where Robin pipes up, saying that they should throw him from the moon door, to which Lysa says, we may do that. And that is the end of the chapter. But again, we really see the atmosphere of the Vale here, right? Like, imagine you're just a knight of the Eyrie or something, and you've kind of been forced into being very much out of the loop, right? The Vale has been very active in the world for the last 30 years up to this point. Even before that, right? The Vale, they were very close to the Targaryens in history, when they take the throne. And so now we're very much in the isolation time period, which kind of feels really like pre-Targaryen era. We're kind of going back to that where Lysa's just kind of holding up in the Eyrie. We don't really have any ties with King's Landing at this point anymore after Jon Arryn's death. So you go to being like the closest the Vale has probably been, like with the throne being the hand of the king and Jon Arryn, and having a fantastic relationship, being a father figure for, again, Robert and also Ned, to now where you're completely isolated. It's a very big change. And when you have these rumors speculating that, especially in the Vale with how the Blackfish talks about it, that maybe Jon Arryn was poisoned or he had a very suspicious death, you can understand why the Vale feels really angry at this point. And there's just a lot of uncertainty, right? I mean, this is a really interesting philosophical argument here is, would you rather have, again, a crisis when it comes to succession because you have a sickly boy who may become king, he could maybe die, what comes after that, or even or just straight up a bad ruler because, hey, at least you know who your ruler is going to be. Whenever you have a crisis when it comes to the succession, usually that leads to a civil war. Usually you have a Dance of the Dragons. Usually you have a Blackfire Rebellion. And so you're sitting here at this point for the Vale, and there's just so much indecision, inaction. There's so much that you just don't know, right? It's the fear of the future, of the uncertainty that's going on here, and Lysa definitely is not helping that. But thank you guys all for watching this video. Sorry for it being a day late. Just was extremely long video, as you guys can see by the length of it. And, you know, school starting this week. Plus, you also pointed out I got a herniated disc in my back. You know, it's just been a really busy week. So, yeah, thank you guys all for sticking with me on this one. Hope you guys all enjoyed it. And I see you guys all in the next video. Bye, guys.